Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. Also teach in Toronto and mostly these days online. My guest today is Imogen Ragone, an Alexander Technique teacher in Wilmington, Delaware, who also teaches, I think, pretty much exclusively online as well these days.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're going to do a little experiment where I'm going to talk Imogen through a process that I've been using a lot lately with my online students. And then we'll talk about it. It'll be a very short little video, won't be terribly long, and hopefully it'll be useful. So Imogen, welcome.
Um, Thank you. Always interested to be here. I have no idea what
Well,
you're going to surprise me with. So,
I appreciate your open-mindedness and your spirit of adventure. So we're going to start with you doing using walking as a context for exploring this process, and then we'll go to sitting and explore it in a slightly different context. So if you could set things up so you can walk around that nice studio space you got there.
Need to.
Good. So,
So just should I
yeah,
start?
here's what I'd like you to do. If you would maybe even stand back as far as you can in the room so we have as long a walkway as we can get. And what I'd like you to do is walk in a moment, walk towards the camera and then turn around and walk back. And at the first part of the walk, just walk without any Alexander thought or direction. But when you get about halfway across the room, could you just make a decision that you're going to use half as much effort to walk?
Okay.
So you start with a regular walk. Good. And then turn around and walk a little bit and cut it back, cut the effort back another 50%. Yeah. And turn around and maybe cut it back another 50%. Let's see what happens. Okay, let's pause there and maybe have a seat. So what did you notice when you did those cutbacks?
Well, definitely the first time seemed it was I experienced quite a dramatic difference,
Mm-hmm.
and I could use a lot of kind of classic Alexander kind of descriptions that people say when they have a lesson, that it suddenly felt lighter. I felt a
Mm-hmm.
little bit
Mm-hmm.
maybe taller, less burdened as I was
Mm-hmm.
walking along.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that kind of continued with each time, but each time there wasn't as much distinction. The
Right.
first time was the most, and the last time was, I couldn't really tell if I got
Right. And that
much.
that is a pretty common experience. And I want to talk about it, about what I think's going on, but I'd like to just take it in a couple of other applications before we do that. So we have prearranged. The one thing you do know is you're going to be using this book that you have on your desk. Very appropriate. All four of Alexander's books in one volume. I bet most people seeing this will never have heard of that. It's a pretty heavy book, right? It's got some heft to it.
Yeah,
Okay,
the thin, dense pages.
right. So what would happen so let's just explore if you would just pick up the book, lift it off the desk a bit, and then put it down again with no particular Alexander intention. And now repeat that action with half the effort. You just tell yourself, I'm only using half as much effort to lift it, and put it back down, and then cut the effort by half again. So yeah, good. So that's, and then put it back down. So that second cut started to really affect your ability to lift it, right? Or you could still lift it, but it looked like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, what I noticed myself doing was I had to think also about how I was lifting it. I didn't just grip it. It's like to use less effort. I put my hands kind of under it, so I didn't have to.
Oh, that just
You know,
came
there were kind
about.
of there were mechanical things as well as the quality of what I was doing that changed.
Right, right.
Because I kind of thought if I used 50% less effort and pick it up like this, I'm not going to be able to pick it up.
Something else had to change
Something else had to change in the how
in
I
how
was
you
actually
did the
going to
lifting.
do it. Yeah.
Okay, so that's our second experiment. And I want to do one more. And I like to emphasize this one in particular is truly an experiment. Different students have very different experiences with it. So you're sitting there talking to me, right?
I am, yes.
You're sitting and occasionally speaking and you're listening. What would happen, and the only way to find out is for you to try this, if you said to yourself, I'm using half as much effort to be here right now. Now, it looked to me like your breathing expanded a bit. Yeah, that was pretty, I think, pretty obvious.
Yeah.
And again, you could do it again. You say, well, half again. It looked like there was a little something, and you could keep going. At some point, you're probably not going to notice much.
At some point, I might lie down on the floor.
Well, maybe you might decide to lie
I'm just
down.
kidding.
Yeah. Well, so, but let's even just taking that first example, you're sitting there. I imagine in your mind, you weren't doing much of anything other than just sitting there.
Just sitting here, you know, there's some Alexander in my background, so
right.
I'm not all hunched over or scrunched up. I did, but it was quite apparent that I was doing more than I needed once you gave me the instruction to use half as much effort. So
right, and that was true in all three of the experiments, different ways. Yeah. So here's my take on that, why I think that's a pretty effective thing to experiment for anybody, not just someone that has lots of Alexander experience like we do, but really anybody.
Oh, yeah.
To just have that, play with that idea, whatever I'm doing now, what would happen if I dialed it back by some large number, 50%, and then I did it again and did it again. And what often happens is the first 3 or 4 dial backs, if it's, let's say it's walking, it takes quite a while for the dialing back to actually make walking itself get slower or almost not possible. You know, the first few cutbacks, the walking typically gets easier and lighter, and there's nothing sacrificed.
So I guess it's about, or one of the ways we can use this experiment or this exploration is to discover where that edge is between how little I need to do and when it's too little for what I want to be doing.
Right, exactly. There will come a point when, if you keep dialing back, the activity, the activity just isn't going to happen. But sometimes, especially for people who are carrying a lot of tension in their bodies, that might be multiple cutbacks. Now, just to clarify for someone listening to this, when I say cut it back 50%, I mean, who knows how much you cut it back? I mean, but certainly you had a clear intention that you were
I had a sense that I wanted to use half as much effort.
Significantly less. Yeah, and whether it's 50% or 75, we don't know. But clearly, something significant happened in all three cases. And my take on it is, if you tell yourself, I want to do this activity that I habitually do in a certain way with half the effort, then you're all the lower level systems in your body, starting with the back part of your brain and nervous system. And so, I mean, that's something that comes from here. I mean, that's prefrontal cortex. The commander in chief says half the energy. The rest of the body, the rest of the nervous system, is essentially tasked with, well, okay, how do I do that? And how do I do that in the best way? And the best way would probably be get rid of all the stuff that's not helpful first. And once that's all gotten rid of, then if the owner keeps saying cut back, then maybe the activity itself will be somewhat compromised. But for most people, 1 or 2 or 3 cutbacks can happen without any change really in the effectiveness of the action. Actually makes it more effective, with less effort. And to me, how this fits in with some other stuff we've talked about in previous previous videos, is we're dealing with this interface between intention and activity, thought and movement. And we've talked a lot earlier about a kind of a version of inhibition, which is an Alexander term, bit of jargon, meaning not doing what you don't want to do. That's oversimplified, but not doing the things that get in the way. Or some versions of inhibition are, I just don't do anything and just see what happens. But this is more, you might say, inhibition light. Like, there's not really total inhibition, but if you're saying I cut back 50%, you're achieving the kind
you're inhibiting, to use the jargon term, you're inhibiting approximately 50% or however. You're inhibiting some of the patterns or the excess tension that you don't want to be in your walking or picking up a book or sitting here at the computer.
Exactly. And what you're cutting back, at least initially, is going to be pretty much exclusively stuff that either gets in the way or has no use. So that's it. I think what I found,
like it. I'm going to play with this more.
I used to use this a bit years ago, and I sort of got out of it, and I came back to it fairly recently. And everyone I've explored this with, all the students new and some older, had been coming for lessons for a while. It's for all of them, it's an easy thing to do. And it's pretty clear what the effects are. For example, if you happen to have been wearing hard sole shoes when you were walking on the wooden floor, my guess is if you'd been paying attention to the sound your feet made, it would have been a lot softer after maybe the second, third cutback, maybe even probably right away after the first cutback, and as long as you were still moving across the room, getting where you were going to go with less noise, that'd be a pretty clear indication that you were putting less pressure on yourself and on the floor.
A great tip for anyone who wants to be able to walk stealthily around the house.
Well, to me,
I'm joking,
absolutely. If you,
If
hate to
you want
use
to
this
creep up on
phrase. I hate
someone,
to
use
use,
the Alexander technique.
well, I hate to use this phrase for someone who happens to have the certain love of a certain animal, but if you were a cat burglar, this would be the way to go. But it would also be the way to go for anyone who just does ordinary things and would like to do them more easily with less strain. I mean, really, I think anybody could use this.
I don't know why the example, because like you say, it can be used for anything, but I'm just thinking about pushing a cart around the supermarket.
Sure.
And I can just imagining myself do it, kind of know that I probably use more effort than's needed. So that could be a cool place to try it out.
Or, you know what, where I think I just sort of volunteered to do, we've just moved into a new house. For those of you familiar with my background image, it's changed fairly dramatically. And I perhaps mistakenly volunteered to do the vacuuming upstairs. You know, vacuuming, it carries with it a certain stimulus to do more than you really need to do.
Yeah, it's like we need to help the vacuum to suck up the dirt, and we kind of put that into
and the pushing of it and all of that.
So really, all we need to, as long as we're moving it along, it can do the work, right?
Absolutely. It doesn't need a lot of effort on your part. So I invite anyone who's watching this to explore it and leave comments on your experience, either on Facebook where it'll be published, or on YouTube where it will be initially published. And as I say, I think this is sort of could be kind of an entryway into some bigger Alexander ideas that anybody could use. Yeah,
it seems like this would be an easy thing to try out.
Pretty open source, really. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, my guest has been Imogen Ragone, an Alexander teacher in Wilmington. I'm an Alexander teacher in Omaha, and I will put a link to Imogen's website by the interview and a link to a site that will enable you to learn more about the Alexander technique and find a teacher anywhere in the world. All right, so I guess that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.